So this morning, there are new questions about presidential pardons in the Russia probe. The New York Times reports that President Trump's former lead counsel, John Dowd, discussed offering pardons for Trump's former top advisors, Michael Flynn and Paul Manafort, as Mueller closed in on them last year. Let's bring in my panel, Betsy Woodruff, politics reporter for the Daily Beast and an MSNBC contributor, Clint Watts, former FBI special agent and an MSNBC national security analyst, and Seth Waxman, a former federal prosecutor and a partner at the law firm Dickinson Wright. Good to see all of you. Seth, if this is true, could this be obstruction of justice?
Well, it could. I mean, the idea that he's possibly dangling out this idea of a pardon to Paul Manafort or Michael Flynn is very troubling. But, you know, the idea that constitutional powers are absolute, I mean, we all, and that's kind of the argument here, is
meaning
that
the president can pardon whoever he wants.
Whenever he wants, for whatever reason.
Yep.
And we all know that in the Constitution, there are limits at times. I mean, for freedom of speech, you can't run into a crowded theater and scream fire. So there are limits. And to kind of paint a law school hypothetical to draw this out a bit. I mean, if the president and his son, for example, were in the White House and the president told his son to pick up a gun and shoot someone, and that happened, and a moment later they came in to investigate and the president says, well, I'm pardoning myself and I'm pardoning my son, I think we'd all have a lot of trouble with that. I mean, it can't be just absolute at all times and in all ways. So in this instance, if Mr. Trump were to pardon Paul Manafort or dangle that out there, and under the circumstances it was, look, if you stay silent, if you refuse to cooperate, if you do things to minimize our joint conduct, there's a carrot out there for you. I'll take care of you in the future. That's concerning. Now, the question hasn't been answered constitutionally, but my point is there are limits. Just because something's in the Constitution doesn't mean it's absolute under all circumstances.
And Betsy, I mean, we also heard Sarah Sanders denying this yesterday, but I mean, the problem for the White House on denials is in the past they've proved unreliable. And there's also the big question about whether Dowd was acting on his own or was he acting at Trump's direction if this happens. What's the likelihood he would do something like that on his own?
It actually strikes me as decently plausible that Dowd would be comfortable freelancing and bringing up this type of idea of a pardon without necessarily having the president sign off. Dowd is an eccentric character, and he is fond of sometimes making statements that in certain cases seemed to actually undermine his own client. At times, he and the president even almost publicly butted heads back in January when President Trump told a spray of reporters that he would like to sit down with Mueller. I spoke on the phone with Dowd shortly after, and Dowd basically told me, no, I'm the one who decides if the president will speak with Mueller, and I haven't made up my mind yet. Now, that's a very unusual way for a lawyer to act. Lawyers aren't supposed to tell their clients what to do. A lawyer gives a client advice. He doesn't boss the client around.
He lays out the options and he says, what do you want to do? Here's my advice. What do you want to do?
And the fact that Dowd put himself in that place is unusual, but I think it points to perhaps a greater truth, which is Dowd himself was behaved as a lawyer in a way that was very atypical. And I think it's possible, one explanation that strikes me as a realistic one of how all these facts could make sense together is that Dowd could have easily been freelancing on this pardoning conversation.
Well, I mean, we've seen it, I think, probably, at least in claim before, whether you believe that Cohen actually tried to make a deal with Stormy Daniels by himself. Now you have his own lawyer, Cohen's own lawyer, calling him a fixer and saying that he freelanced on this. Clint, look, we're talking about a question about whether or not a president used his power or someone on his behalf used the power of his office to derail an investigation. And we're talking about freelancing potentially here. Have you ever seen anything like this?
No. I mean, we've never seen anything like President Trump. Or why does he need a team of lawyers around him 100% of the time to get through the day? It's pretty
on a couple of different topics.
Right. I mean, he's got teams of lawyers, you know, just to get from morning to night.
Well, one smaller than the other, actually. I believe now his Manafort team, right, his Mueller team is actually smaller than the team that is fighting him, fighting for him in the Stormy Daniels case, et cetera.
Yeah, for investigative purposes, it'll come down to, was it discussions or was it offers? I mean, are they actually, having conversations, or are they floating the idea publicly in hopes that a witness might change their decision about how they would or would not want to cooperate? And when you're looking at an obstruction case, man, this is very damning if we see that there is pardon talk going back and forth or even discussions with any of these individuals as they were trying to decide how to deal with the Mueller case.
Yeah, and the Washington Post takes a look at exactly that and argues this could be why Manafort isn't cooperating. Quote, Manafort believes he has a get-out-of-jail-free card, so as long as he keeps quiet and absorbs the costs of trial. So that was kind of to the point that, you were making. How do you get to the heart of something like this?
Well, it's striking that of all the people that are left out there, Paul Manafort's still standing. It's always kind of struck me as to why he hasn't flipped. Michael Flynn, Papadopoulos, and others.
Does this become a he said, he said?
Well, and that's the way prosecutors look at cases. You have to bill it through surrounding circumstances. So if all you have is a he said, that's very difficult. I mean, a prosecutor's got to prove things beyond a reasonable doubt. Right. And so what you look at is the surrounding circumstances. So if you have offers being floated through the lawyer, and maybe that lawyer has to end up testifying. If Paul Manafort is telling others that he's going to sit tight because, I got a potential pardon coming to me down the line. I mean, it's that kind of evidence that would have to be accumulated to somehow bolster a criminal case. Because I think if it comes down to a he said, that's a very difficult case to bring to a court of law.
I want to quickly touch on the Stormy Daniels case and play what Michael Cohen's lawyer said last night about the non-disclosure agreement. Take a listen.
The president was not aware of the agreement. There were a ton of matters that took place that Michael fixed. And Donald Trump wasn't involved in every single matter, all right? And the other reason why we know, there was a line there, right, for DD, all right? It was blank.
David Dennison.
It was blank, right? And that's evidence in and of itself that he didn't go to Donald Trump because the line was blank. He left the line blank.
So lawyers started tweeting like crazy in the middle of that interview, saying he threw Cohen under the bus, saying that he made the president of the United States a party to an agreement that he knew nothing about. And in addition, if he did know about it, it means there's no contract between Stormy Daniels and the president of the United States, or whatever his nom de plume is. And Daniels can then release her story. So in attempting to clarify Cohen's comments, which is why we believe he went on television in the first place, did he just make matters worse?
He very well may have. I mean, for the exact point you've brought up. And what's always kind of struck me about this, again, is that a lawyer would come out of pocket out of his own money, $130,000, and he's claiming the president had no idea about that. Maybe he didn't have an idea about it this time, but what I'm very curious about is if there's discovery in this case, whether they get into, have you done this before for him? So maybe he's being truthful when he says, today I didn't talk to Mr. Trump about it, but because their past history, that's the way it's always worked with them. Michael Cohen has gone out and paid off person A, B, and C. He knows that payment's coming, so there wasn't any need for him on this occasion to affirmatively ask Mr. Trump. So I think the history in that relationship will come into play through discovery, and if we find out this is kind of a pattern in practice, well, maybe he didn't ask on this occasion, but he clearly is out, and we're hearing reports that he's disappointed that he hasn't been reimbursed up till this point.
Clint, the look on your face as you were listening to that
every law school must have their own syllabus update daily with all these videos. I mean, you could write a whole course that's called President Trump's Legal Teams, a series of case studies.
I actually think that that's probably in the works somewhere, or maybe it's already there and we just haven't heard about it. Thank you guys so much. And up next.